We have the worst inflation in 4 decades, the worst collapse in real wages in 40 years, the worst crime wave since the 1990s, the worst border crisis in U.S. history. We have Joe Biden, who is the least popular president since Harry Truman, since presidential polling happened, and there wasn't a red wave. That is a searing indictment of the Republican Party. That is a searing indictment of the message that we have been sending to the voters. They looked at all of that and looked at the Republican alternative and said, no thanks. The Republican Party needs to do a really deep introspection look in the mirror right now, because this is an absolute disaster.
Those are harsh words, and I think also accurate words being said on Fox News on the night of the midterms by Marc Thiessen. And the question is, will they actually learn? This is obviously a massive lost opportunity. The historic pattern is that the party out of power picks up seats, and they're going to kind of like technically do that. But they had a massive opportunity to win governor's races, as well as not only take over the Senate, but honestly, they could have been up by 3 or 4 seats potentially. And they wasted that. Now, this is a different conversation than to what extent should Trump be involved in this. But Jerry, you are old enough to remember back in, I think, 2012, the Republicans got a shellacking, and they needed to seriously take a look at the state of their party and come up with a new path, a more rational, reasonable path. And they clearly didn't do that. So this is another opportunity for them to learn. Do you think on the issues they've been talking about, the election denial, all of that, what direction do you think they're going to go in as we move towards 2024?
Well, it depends on how many people are thinking like Marc Thiessen. Because again, this is surface level type of stuff. Thiessen was talking about all the grievances within the country, as if that's a Republican issue. There's such a focus on solely their party people and the people that they think support them only, that they don't understand that there's another whole portion of the country that might think a little differently, but actually dislikes the problem with inflation, dislikes the problem with our wages issues, and dislikes all the stuff that's happening that they detail. Democrats and libs hate that stuff too. They're just looking for a way for it to end. And every time those things are proposed, what we end up seeing is the folks who expected to be given that position openly and directly push back against it. There was a full-on sheet that I'm trying to remember the congressman who posted it. He put how many percentage of Republicans voted against like the baby formula stuff, border security, gas prices, all these things that they said is worried about destroying the economy. People are beginning to understand which party is maybe not doing much for it versus the party that's trying to make these things worse. It's a grievance issue. So if you want to grieve about it, Thiessen does a good job of that. But what he didn't say, maybe he said it in a fuller clip, was the Republican Party's in trouble. Therefore, we need to address inflation, not bitch and complain about it. We need to address these problems, not just complain about it. People don't want complaints. We've all got that already. We're good at that. How about we get some solutions? Maybe they're starting to see it, but you asked me what my prediction is. What they're gonna think this means is we're supposed to grieve harder.
Yeah, and look, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult to convince, especially their media arm, to stop doing the thing that, while it didn't lead to midterm wins, is working for them. Like if you're these media figures, if you're an independent right-wing media or whatever, like you're getting a big audience by like trying to encourage people to kill the trans community or whatever. It didn't result in the Senate being taken over necessarily. So why would you change at that point? And when you're out there convincing the Republican base in primaries to only accept a particular brand of weirdo, then you might have reasonable Republicans that want to run the next time around, and they might have a much better chance of winning in the general election. But how are they going to get through the primaries? The Republican base that votes in primaries are out of their GD mind at this point. So they're really between a rock and an insane place. And by the way, like this is eventually, we're gonna be talking a little bit about who should be the figurehead of the Republican Party. But like, you remember the quote from earlier? We showed you the tweet of Matt Walsh, like they wanted this to be about radical ideology, which I don't remember, but okay. So we're gonna make it about that. Well, now he's saying, after it became clear that this was not a red tsunami, most Americans are wildly dissatisfied with the direction of the country, but Republicans weren't able to harness that dissatisfaction. That speaks to a party without any kind of coherent or compelling national message. We need new leadership, top to bottom. Which, if that's the first thing you've ever read from Matt Walsh, seems pretty reasonable. I think he is right. Also, he's one of the chief messengers for the Republican Party, and he chose to make it about all that crazy stuff that didn't win. I'm not saying he's the leader of the Republican Party or anything. He's, a third tier clone of Ben Shapiro. But people like him are the ones who pushed for these crazy candidates. So if they do need to clear out from top to bottom their leaders, why wouldn't they be benefited from getting rid of people like Matt Walsh, who clearly are advancing their own interests and not the interests of the party?
Because what was left off of that was, what is that coherent and compelling national message? What is it? What is it? If anybody can answer that, I'd love to hear it. What is the Republicans' coherent and compelling national message? Because so far it's been just that. Look at these trans kids and look at them joining sports teams, sports bathrooms, locker rooms. Like I said, the same things with the inflation issues. All of these things they bring up, there's no message. It's, what do they think a message is? You're from a position in a platform where you can say what you want and people can hear it, take it in, and analyze it. You haven't said anything yet. So what is that message, bro? What's the new leadership gonna talk about? And by the way, John, I'm not one of those people who thinks that pundits are supposed to have like legislative answers. We're not within Congress where these discussions are had, where bills are written, and there's these like 45-page things and all that stuff. We're not privy to it, we're not part of it. By the way, these guys have people who write that stuff for them because they're not always the smartest folks there. But the thing is if you don't have to necessarily have the full answers from Matt Walsh's point of view, but at least have we should go in this direction. We should have this approach since you have opinions. What's your next opinion?
Yeah, and who thinks that like Matt Walsh and Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro are gonna turn from like making an entire monologue about some third grade teacher to like seriously talking about wages?
Yeah.
Like, or outsourcing. The cost of prescription medication is really high. We're gonna be diving in for an hour-long conversation, bringing in doctors and active. Who thinks they're gonna do that?
And by the way, John, I'm gonna tell you why they can't say anything like that, because it'll be completely opposite to the people who've paid them to say nothing. So if you say, man, inflation's off the charts, man, these gas prices are crazy, red wave is coming, we're gonna bring down the price of gas. The way you bring down the price of gas is to come after the folks who are gouging us on that. That's not what they're willing to do. So they're stuck saying nothing.
Yeah, they have to pretend to be populists or whatever without ever challenging corporations at all. Except maybe in a shallow way, if the corporation like has a lesbian kiss in a movie, then they can criticize it. But they can't advocate for people's interests over corporate interests, and that is a major limiting factor for them. We're gonna see how they try to get past that. And by the way, like we're over the next 2 years, we're gonna be talking about 2024 a lot, so we don't need to focus on it too much right now. But it's entirely possible that the same sort of like not necessarily inflation is gonna be the main issue, but everyone seems to think we're gonna be hitting a recession. That's not gonna help Biden or whoever the Democratic candidate going forward is. In particular, it's not gonna help Biden if he's still the candidate. So there is an economic case to be made. There's just a lot of incentives for them to not even try to make it.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.